Marex as a company itself, we're looking to be carbon neutral this year, and we've invested in a project of mangrove restoration and reforestation in Indonesia, and that's how we're going to offset our own footprint. But it's obviously a critical thing for our clients as well. Our clients largely heavily involved in commodities, and commodities are a key part of the green transition, partly because fossil fuels obviously are things to transition away from, but actually a lot of base metals are the components that are going to be needed to create electric vehicle batteries, for example, and all of the other sort of renewable technology that's going to be needed as part of that transition. So it's an enormous structural changer for our industry and our company. Well, there's two ways really. One is about providing with solutions. I mean, we're a financial services company, so it is about facilitating their access to the voluntary offset markets, for example, or indeed the compliance markets. There are the areas where we can't help. If they're producers, for example, they're already very heavily involved in reducing their own footprint in an engineering sense, but also helping to promote new technologies. We've been working with the University of Oxford to create a methodology for sort of science-based technology-driven assessment of carbon, using high-resolution satellites that can monitor tens of thousands of hectares in one go, which is a lot more scalable and faster and more accurate than some of the existing methodologies that are out there. A lot of it depends on where you're based. In the UK, there are now legal requirements about what you must report in terms of your carbon footprint. But I think regardless of whether legislation is enforcing it, market pressure, media pressure means large companies cannot simply ignore this transition. So the amount of disclosure is only going up and up and up. There's a huge amount of money and effort being put into reducing carbon footprint of producing commodities, and it's actually been incredibly successful, even though a lot of people complain about China, for example. The carbon footprint of producing a ton of aluminium in China over the last 10 years has dropped from 30 tons of carbon per ton of aluminium to 12. So there's been real advances going on. There's still more to go. But I think, whilst a lot of the media focus is still on the carbon footprint, I think we have to recognise a lot of the effort that has already been going on that is working. I think it's much less of a problem than people think. I mean, no journalist ever publishes a story saying what a great job this company's done in reducing its carbon footprint. The real accusation of greenwashing is that you're doing it in order to not have to reduce your carbon footprint. But if you actually look at the data, and the data I just suggested, for China, for example, if your carbon footprint of producing aluminium has dropped from 30 to 12, then you are doing something. But you cannot ever get to carbon zero production of commodities. There'll always be some number that you cannot reduce beyond, and that's where offsetting is supposed to do the final leg. That's an interesting one. So I think one of the challenges for the carbon market has probably been the blurring of the ESG lines into one single thing. When we're talking about climate impact, that is purely about carbon impact in the atmosphere. What are you emitting and what are you removing? And that is a very different thing to perhaps a social impact that you might have from projects, say, in Africa, where you're sort of giving people new cook stoves. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not environmental. It's not removing carbon from the atmosphere. And I think to a certain extent the carbon market sort of has created a problem for itself by blurring the sort of social benefits with carbon credits. And I think it's better to have carbon as a science-based metric, and then social benefits are something which can be valued separately from that. The single best source that seems to be the most relied upon is from the United Nations. So they have their Sustainable Development Goals, and a selection of criteria that they think projects should meet. And obviously not every project can meet every single one of those goals. But I think that's the basic framework that people are working within. Obviously very different for very different companies. We're a financial services firm, and as a regulated firm, governance is somewhat automatic in the sense that we kind of have so many kind of legal regulatory obligations to follow that governance can, to a certain extent, be covered with that. I think it becomes more of a challenge perhaps for some of our clients, particularly those operating in sort of potentially politically problematic countries where monitoring money, the flow of funds, money laundering, all those sort of things, and that's a greater challenge. Fortunately, as a regulated company, we have very robust systems in place anyway that we're sort of obliged to have. Integrity. I think you have all the acronyms in the world, but ultimately it's about whether companies pursue these goals with integrity. Because the more documentations and frameworks you can have, really often the more loopholes you create. So unless companies are prepared to pursue these goals with integrity, it probably doesn't matter anyway. So I think that's, for me, probably the missing letter.